Mr. Sito Ipin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I thank SMS for his statement. SMS mentioned about the new deadlines of April and July 2020. Whilst this is a welcome move, it is still 8 to 11 months away. Given the high numbers of fires involving PMDs recently, is there anything else the MOT can do to mitigate these things that are happening? Thank you.
I'd like to thank Mr. Sito for the clarification and also for his continuous support as GPC Transport Chairman. MOT is very mindful of the fire safety concerns about PMDs, and we have studied this issue very, very carefully and consulted various stakeholders, and therefore the decision to bring forward the deadline for complying with the UL 2272 by 6 months, as well as a mandatory inspection regime from 1st April 2020. We understand that many Singaporeans rely on PMDs for their livelihoods and their commuting needs, such as the story of Mr. Hafiz and Mr. Loh that have shared. And we understand that, if you were to ban non-UL 2272 devices immediately, that will definitely impose a lot of hardship and inconvenience to many Singaporeans. Our discussion with some of the PMD retailers, especially with the PMD Retailers Association, has also confirmed that 1st July 2020 is a reasonable timeline, as it gives retailers sufficient time to bring in the certified devices so that you can have a smooth replacement scheme. So in the meantime, what we can do is that we will continue to encourage non-UL 2272 certified device owner to switch to compliant ones as soon as possible. And at the same time, we also understand that many of the causes of PMD-related fires can be attributed to other factors, such as improper charging practices, use of incompatible chargers or adapters, and as such, LTA will be working very closely with SCDF to step up fire safety education on PMDs. And just to remind members of the House as well as all Singaporeans, we can actually minimize the risk of fire by avoiding overcharging the batteries, like I mentioned before. We should avoid illegally modifying their devices, and also avoid tampering with the electrical components or leaving the devices unattended when charging. And if possible, please do not leave your PMD to charge overnight, because there's a tendency for the devices to overheat if you overcharge it excessively beyond what is required. And owners should also check that the batteries are in good condition, look for any damages or deformities that may give an indication that the battery may not be safe to be continued to be used. And we also make sure that original power adapters affixed with the Enterprise Singapore safety mark are used to charge the devices. So these are some of the practical advice I will give Singaporeans while we await the implementation of the new deadline.
Mr. Lim Biao-Chuan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senator State, we have been discussing many of these PMD-related safety issues for the past 1 to 2 years. Situation is not getting any better. Every time I have a dialogue, I get a earful from my residents saying that how dangerous it is to walk on these footpaths because the PMDs just come up behind them silently. So if these new measures, is MOT or LTA simply being reactive rather than trying to preempt the problem? I understand some countries have already banned PMDs from the footpaths. Has LTA considered banning these PMDs from footpaths until our infrastructure is improved? Last month I filed a question about park connectors and asked why NParks are not prepared to draw lines demarcating pedestrians from PMDs. But NPark says no, they are not prepared to do so. And that adds to the complication, because pedestrians don't know, if I run left, I get knocked down. I run right, I also can get knocked down. So really, Senior Minister of State, this situation is quite urgent, and safety should be paramount. Would MOT really consider banning PMDs until our infrastructure is improved? The other question I have for SMS is, can we take stiffer action against retailers that sell non-compliant batteries or PMDs? Because otherwise, if they just get fined, they can make it all back from selling such non-compliant batteries and PMDs. Let's give them a heftier punishment, even send them to jail if necessary, so that everyone will know the importance of compliance. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Mr. Lim for the many supplementary questions. In fact, we had various discussions on these issues on PMD safety over the past 1 to 2 years. And MOT really appreciate all the feedback given by members of the House. And if you look at some of these measures that we have come up with, it shows that we are listening, we know the concerns on the ground, and we will not hesitate to take the necessary actions whenever it's appropriate. But I also like to remind all members that the reason why we promote active mobility is because we believe that it is good for Singaporeans and for Singapore. And that helps with our vision of a car-like society. And as with introduction of any new technology, our regulatory regime has to be nimble and responsive, like I mentioned in my ministerial statement, and that we will have to evolve with the needs according to the situation and feedback on the ground. And I also would like to reiterate that safety is of paramount importance, and we will take all feedback seriously. And thus far, Singapore remains the only country that has implemented the UL 2272 standard for e-scooters. And this has been a bold and decisive move in September 2018 to deal with the potential issues of fire safety. And we are also the first country to introduce a mandatory registration, as well as soon mandatory inspection regime for PMDs with regards to the weight, width, the motorized speed, as well as the UL 2272 requirements. You have also rightly pointed out that could we have banned PMD use right from the beginning, or even at this point in time until all the infrastructures are ready. Well, we could have taken the path of least resistance at the beginning to completely ban PMDs on pavements and shared paths. But I think we have debated in the House during the introduction of the Active Mobility Bill that, taking all things into consideration, I think PMD still has a role to play in providing active mobility options, as well as providing the first and last mile connectivity. And if we had banned PMD use on pathways, what it actually means is that we would have just pushed PMDs onto the roads, which will likely lead to more fatalities because of the higher speed of buses and cars and lorries traveling on the same road. But instead, what we have done is actually to implement a very comprehensive regime to ensure that PMDs are used in a safe and responsible manner. And with that, I think I want to urge Singaporeans to continue to work with us in making active mobility a safe and relevant options for everyone. And with regards to your questions on the enforcement on some of these errant retailers who are irresponsibly selling devices that are non-compliant, I think LTA will definitely take a very close watch and will not hesitate to take tough actions against them. And also with regards to your question on PCN shared paths, I think currently we are working with all the relevant agencies to see how we can enhance safety of PMDUs on shared paths. And we also will be working with local advisors to see how we can have infrastructure enhancement to tackle some of these issues on the ground.
Dr. Teo Ho Pin.
Sir, I have 3 clarifications for the Minister. First, I think will the Ministry consider licensing the PMD so as to manage the growth of PMD in Singapore, and also to make it compulsory for the PMD riders to attend a safe riding course? Second, I think, can the Ministry also consider reducing the speed limit of the approved PMD paths, especially those shared paths with pedestrians? And third, of course, the town councils welcome the 5 trial sites which LTA has identified in terms of designating them as a pedestrian zone-only site. We hope that the study will help us to better understand the behavior of PMDs in these town centres especially, because the town council has planned also to ban all common property for PMDs unless it's approved by the town council or LTA.
I'd like to thank Dr. Teo Ho Pin for those supplementary questions. In fact, we have started the mandatory registration of PMDs, and we have only started that recently. So I will urge everyone to give it some time, for it to take effect. At the same time, we also strongly encourage all riders to go through the Safe Riding program, which I've mentioned earlier. And to date, we have more than 57,000 individuals who have already attended the SRP. And to encourage the take-up of the SRP, we have made it completely free of charge. It's fully subsidized for the first 2 years to December 2019. So if you know of anyone who has not gone for the course, please encourage them to do so while it is free of charge. And we'll continue to also work with the active mobility interest groups, the schools, the companies, especially food delivering companies, to encourage all the cyclists and PMD riders to attend the SRP. As to the speed limit of the devices on the various paths, AMAP has recently recommended to MOT to reduce the speed limit of PMD devices, including bicycle, on footpaths from 15, to reduce it from 15 to 10, and 25 along shared paths. So far, we have received some feedback similarly to what Dr. Teo Ho Pin has shared, whether this could be reduced further. I think I have asked Professor Faisal, together with his AMAC team, to look at some of these suggestions, and hopefully, they will be able to come back with some recommendations by the end of this year. As to the 5 trial sites, I'd like to thank Dr. Teo Ho Pin, for agreeing to coordinate the efforts of implementing the trials in the 5 selected town councils. In fact, initially we wanted to hold this trial over 6 months, and after discussing with the town council chairman, we've decided to bring it down to 3 months, because we want to know its effectiveness, and if it's proven to be effective, we will extend it to all the town councils, to all the different towns island-wide.
Mr. Sia Camping.
Few supplementary questions for SMS. I think first we recognize the advantages that PMDs bring to society, and it can create jobs as well. I think by and large we have no problems with many of the users who use it responsibly. The problem, as we know, is always a small group of PMD users who flout the rules, and also retailers who flout the rules. So my first supplementary question to SMS concerns individuals, users who flout the rules, who do not know how to use it and endanger their lives, whether they use it on the roads or on the pathways. We know so many cases where there are injuries, near misses, and it's very difficult, much as we like in terms of enforcement. How do we report them? My residents have told me that even if they want to, they don't know how. The users zoom past them and there's no time to take a photo and all that. So I think we need well, the rules are there. The rules are no good if it's not enforced. So can we think of ways where we either step up enforcement through technology, through more people? I'm not sure how. I'm sure the fraction, it is a small fraction of the number of people we have to do this enforcement compared to the number of users that's on the road. So that's my first question. How can we step up enforcement against irresponsible users, regardless whether they are using on the road or on the pathways? Because we can't fix that, as what Mr. Lim has asked for. Second question, I also echo, retailers who are outrightly selling things which they should not. I think stiffer action needs to be taken. There shouldn't be any two ways about it. And we should be firm, we should be hard, and should send the right message across, both retailers and irresponsible users. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seah, for those two supplementary questions. The first one is on the small group of irresponsible users. And I totally agree with you that majority of PMD users are responsible. Right now we have 90,000 who have registered their PMD in our database. And we know that only a small number of them are irresponsible. And how can we then enhance our enforcement actions against this small group of people? But having said that, we don't want to just ban the use of PMD just because of this small group of irresponsible users while affecting the rest who are responsible. So we have, LTA has started what we call this crowdsourcing application. I think Mr. Sam has read in the papers about the report, a PMD, PAD incident, which is within mytransport.sg application. And this will actually allow any Singaporeans to take a picture of any errant riders that they may encounter. But understand its limitation. We will review and monitor the reports they receive from this application. And whenever possible, we will take enforcement action against the errant rider. But at the same time, we also understand that sometimes it may be difficult to identify the irresponsible user just through a picture or using the app. But this also will give us good information on some of these areas that are potentially hotspot, and then we can step up enforcement actions, whether physically or otherwise, at these places. I've also mentioned in my ministerial statement that we have also increased the number of enforcement officers, AMEOs, up to about 200 thus far. And I believe, with more manpower, we'll be able to do more. In fact, LTA has stepped up enforcement actions to the extent that almost on a daily basis, you will see that LTA will be putting up postings in its Facebook about some of these errant riders being summoned and some of these non-compliant devices being impounded. At the same time, we will also see how we can harness technology in our enforcement efforts, one of which I've explained in my statement, which is piloting the use of mobile CCTVs at certain hotspots, and see how we can use video analytics for the enforcement actions. As to your second clarification on errant retailers, yes, indeed, I share the same sentiment that we should really get tough on some of these irresponsible retailers. And like mentioned in my previous reply, we will not hesitate to take very stiff actions against some of these errant retailers.
Engineer Lee Biwa.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I'd like to thank SMS for including Khatib Center as one of the 5 piloted sites for POZ. In fact, Khatib Center has been POZ long before, until Active Mobility Act come into force. And I would like to ask SMS to work closely with the local MP. I have a lot more POZ in Nison South that I would like to work with MOT. It is not just the Khatib Center, cover Linkway as well. I have 3 supplementary questions. Just now, SMS mentioned that there are 90,000 PMDs being registered so far. Out of these 90,000, how many are non-complying? And from now until July, 11 months, I think if the number is huge, a lot of us will have nightmares, still worry about have to run in the middle of the night. Second question, from 1st April, compulsory inspection before they can register PMD. Is that one-off inspection, or will there be subsequent inspection? Because after that, they can do modification as well. And the third question is that for those within 400 meters from MRT train stations where you have covered linkway, those are the areas that normally we receive a lot of feedback of near accidents. So I would like to ask SMS whether the infrastructure that you mentioned, the funding that you mentioned, will it be carried out for all the covered linkway within the 400 meters? And I'm glad to hear about using the technology. Recently, I had a meeting with Singtel. In fact, they shared with me that they have the technology. They can give us who is a top violator, at what time it passed by, and at what speed it went by. So I hope that you can choose my area to be one of those piloted as well. Thank you.
First of all, let me just thank Engineer Dr. Lee Biwa for supporting us in this effort. In fact, I must give credit to Dr. Lee Biwa for the idea of POZs in town centres and neighbourhood centres. I have visited Khatib Town Centre together with Engineer Lee Biwa, and she did show me some of the challenges on the ground, and through some of this feedback from Dr. Lee as well as residents and other town council chairmen and advisors, we have therefore decided to implement or rather introduce these trials of POZs at the 5 selected town centres. But of course, if it proves to be very useful and if we receive very good feedback from advisors as well as residents, we will implement that island-wide to other town councils whom advisors have identified as potential hotspots. As to your clarification on the number of non-compliant PMDs, to date we have 90,000 PMD being registered in our database, of which 10% has been declared to be UL 2272 compliant. So we are looking at 90% of these devices that are non-compliant at this point in time. And therefore, it is one of the reasons why we have decided to bring forward the deadline for UL 2272 certified devices to be used on the ground by only 6 months rather than immediately, because there's a necessity for the retailers to have sufficient time to bring in the compliant devices for the replacement. And at the same time, we are also implementing this mandatory inspection regime from 1st April 2020, and this will allow us, first of all, to verify that indeed some of these so-called compliant PMDs really comply with the requirements of UL 2272. And subsequently, what happens is that only certified, or those that have been certified by our authorized inspection centers to be compliant before they are allowed to be registered for future users. And whether this is going to be a one-off or is it going to be a periodic inspection, currently we are discussing internally, because if you understand the lifespan of a PMD, it's probably going to just last about 2 to 3 years. And if we do have a regular inspection regime, whether that's going to be, first of all, necessary, secondly, whether it's going to be cost-effective, right? But having said that, like I've shared, we are still discussing internally, and if necessary, we may put in the necessary requirements if deemed necessary. Covered linkways, okay. Your last clarification on the crowded covered linkways, whether we are able to use the fund, $50 million fund that has been set up, the answer is yes. We will work with local advisors to identify some of these hotspots and make the necessary infrastructure enhancements as necessary.
Mr. Dennis Tan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I'd like to ask the SMS to answer my PQ question 9 and 10. And I have 2 supplementary questions. One relates to the issue of safe riding courses. Would the government consider making it compulsory for all users of PMD to attend safe riding courses? The SMS mentioned that I think at the moment there are about over 90,000 e-scooters have been registered, and I wonder whether the government has an estimation of how many e-scooters that have been imported and sold in Singapore that have not been registered so far. And we can just well imagine that the figure is definitely greater than 90,000, and of course of the e-scooters that have been used, surely there are a lot of the e-scooters that have been used by more than one owner, i.e. one scooter may be used by a few people in the family. Secondly, still on the issue of public education, and I think I have spoken about this in the past, that I believe that to create a culture of safe riding, it also involves putting the public information on the rules and on the etiquette to the users, i.e. to PMD users, as well as to other park users or path users who may not actively seek out. So they may not go to the LTA Facebook. They may not access certain areas where PMD users may, I'll go and sign up for safe riding courses as such. And this is clearly relevant because, for example, a lot of elderly people, they may not access these Facebook sites, for example, and they are using the footpath in our towns on an everyday basis. And how do we ensure, for example, the simple etiquette that has always been talked about, and that we should keep left, whether it is a PMD user, a bicycle, or a pedestrian? How many persons actually consciously walked on a footpath or in a connector, knowing that you keep left for its own safety and being considerate? Thank you.
I'd like to thank Mr. Dennis Tan for those very pertinent questions. Maybe just allow me to answer your PQ on PMD sharing in private premises. So under the Parking Places Act, operators are required to obtain a license to offer dockless PMD sharing services if users of their PMDs may end PMD rentals in the public space, meaning outside the private premises. And the reason why we are doing this is to prevent indiscriminate parking of shared devices. However, the licensing regime currently does not cover PMD sharing operators who deploy their devices solely on private land. At present, PMDs belonging to commercial shared services operating from private land will be allowed to travel on public paths so long as the rental does not end in a public place. And of course, you know, we are watching this very closely, especially for those PMD sharing operators who do not, who flout this rule. We will take actions against them. However, having said that, from 1st July 2019, it is an offence under the Active Mobility Act for companies to sell or lease non-UL 2272 certified PMDs for use on public paths. And this even includes operators who offer PMD sharing services from private premises. And what this means is that all rented PMDs must be UL 2272 certified. No exception. And our licensing regime under the Parking Places Act requires PMD sharing licensees to procure as well as maintain third-party liability insurance. But this does not apply to those operating solely on private land. So I hope this will actually answer the two PQs that you have filed. You have also asked about whether we have any information on the number of devices that are not registered so far. Unfortunately, we do not have information, even though we started the mandatory registration regime from 1st of July this year. As long as they are not registered, they cannot be used on public paths. And I would encourage owners of such devices, either you quickly register them, if not, you will have to dispose them accordingly in a safe and responsible manner. As to mandatory education on safe riding, we have also asked ourselves whether we should make it mandatory for all PMD users. But we concluded that, you know, at this point in time, it may not be necessary to do so. Instead, like I've mentioned in my reply to Dr. Ho, we'll encourage all riders to go through the safe riding program. We have even provided fully subsidized SRP for all users if they want to take part in this process up to December 2019. And we'll continue to work with all the various interest groups to encourage people to take part in this SRP. We have also published Code of Conduct for PMD users, and this was actually suggested by AMAP. And this actually gives PMD users some guidelines on some of the things that you should do when riding a PMD responsibly. And I also reckon that, you know, sometimes many of our elderly residents may not be aware of some of these rules and social and etiquettes when using public paths. And therefore, we have also engaged the community to help us in this public education effort through the active mobility patrol teams that currently, I think, is present in more than 60 constituencies. And I also want to encourage for those constituencies who do not have an AMP, please sign up for the AMP, and then LTA will work closely with you to educate PMD users as well as your residents on the safe use of PMD and pathways.
Mr. Murali Pillai.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I applaud the announcement by the Honourable Senior Minister of State, Dr. Lam, to bring forward the amnesty period for the use of non-compliant PMDs from end 2020 to 1st July 2020. This is the concern I had in the PQ that I filed for answer in today's session. I have three supplementary questions. The first is in relation to the spike in the fire incidents. As SMS Dr. Lam mentioned, last year we had 52 PMD-related fires. This year, from January to July, we already have had 49 fires. As the members of the House may recall, Dr. Lam made an announcement in this House in September 2018 about the new standards. Following that, retailers of PMDs actually dumped their prices from $600 to about $200 to $300. And I believe this may have resulted in people buying these non-compliant PMDs. And I'm not sure whether there's a correlation between this dumping and the higher incident of fires involving PMDs. I'm also concerned whether or not these PMDs are fit for purpose. So even though you charge the PMDs properly, they could still be fire hazards. So I wonder whether the ministry could provide services to such PMD users to see whether their PMDs are fit for purpose. The second question is in relation to the mandatory inspection date of 1st April 2020. Given that only 10% of PMDs are compliant now, and given that the amnesty ends on the 1st of July 2020, I would imagine that a good percentage of PMDs would fail the inspection come 1st April 2020. So what would be the status of such PMD users? Finally, given that there's still a high number of non-compliant PMDs, after 1st July 2020, I wonder whether steps could be taken to prevent a secondary market of non-compliant PMDs in Singapore. Particularly, perhaps we could consider providing value for scrapping such non-compliant PMDs. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Mr. Morali for those supplementary questions. Indeed, it is of great concern to LTA and MOT when we read of the statistics for PMD-related fires. Like he rightly mentioned, in 2018 we have 52 cases, and just the first half of this year we have 49 cases. But if you look at the same period comparing 2019 first half and 2018 first half, it is actually a threefold increase. And this can be attributed to the increase in the population of PMDs in Singapore. When we first started, our rough estimate 1-2 years ago was about maybe 20,000-30,000, but this has since increased to 90,000 since we implemented the mandatory registration requirements. And as to the 90% of non-compliant PMDs, we will, like I've mentioned before, will encourage owners to quickly change out to the compliant 2272 PMDs as soon as possible. If not, then we will want to remind PMD owners on some of those safe practices when it comes to charging of your non-compliant 2272 devices, which I've already elaborated. Will there be a secondary market for non-compliant PMDs? I hope not, at least not in Singapore, because the use of non-compliant 2272 devices will be illegal from 1st of July 2020. So if we do find out, if we do find out the users will continue to use non-compliant devices, they will be taken to task.
Associate Professor Denugo.
Thank you, SMS. I have three questions. The first one is regarding the cost of the compulsory inspection. Would it be borne by the government or by the owners, and would that be included in the fee for registration? And the second one is about whether there is a deregistration procedure, because I think after an inspection, after, let's say, the battery's shelf life is gone and people are disposing of their PMDs, the PMDs might still be registered, but the PMDs are no longer being used. Or in another scenario, the PMDs might still be continue to be used, but be modified with the registration. So is there a deregistration process for PMDs? And the third one is regarding UL2271 batteries. My understanding is, in some reports, that there's some confusion regards to UL2271 batteries, that they can be used to replace batteries to make PMDs UL2272 compliant, like people buying UL2272 devices, but then replacing the batteries with UL2271 batteries because it's higher quality, more powerful and whatnot. Is this allowed, or is this will make it non-compliant?
I'd like to thank Mr. Goh for those supplementary questions. With regards to the cost of the inspection as well as the subsequent fee for registration when owners replace their PMDs, LTA is working out the details. We'll make the announcement soon. As to deregistration, there is currently a process for PMD users to deregister their registered PMDs. And I would want to remind owners to do so because failure to deregister will not take away your responsibility of being the owner of the PMD device if it's being used illegally subsequently. So there's currently a deregistration process in place. Please remember to deregister your PMD when you want to discard or stop using your PMD. As to the last clarification on UL 2271 or 2272, I would have to check exactly whether they are compatible in terms of the certification. My understanding is that the device is certified UL 2272 based on the battery, including the circuitry of the PMD device. And if any illegal modification or change of a different type of battery, then it will actually render the UL 2272 certification void. But I need to actually verify if UL 2271 is indeed a compatible one. But I would encourage PMD users, if you need to change batteries, please go to a reputable retailer to have it changed out. Don't do it yourself, or don't do it on, through some black market retailers. Go to reputable ones, and at least we can ensure that the certification will not be rendered void.
Ms. Fumiha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have one supplementary question for the for SMS. SMS on improving, Mr. Speaker, on improving infrastructure to cope with the needs of PMD users, cyclists, and pedestrians. I believe just now SMS mentioned about a pilot site at Amokyo where cycling tracks are, significantly being explored to be expanded, and he actually mentioned about if it need to be a dedicated lane on the road will be set aside, if I heard that correctly. And it's something that I'd like to ask the SMS whether the government will actually consider, given the rising popularity of use of PMDs and cycling, whether actually the government will consider going back to the early years of Singapore where there is a dedicated cycling track on the road along with the vehicles, but obviously doing it safely, as part of the future LTA Transport Master Plan. Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to thank Ms. Hu for the clarification. When we mention dedicated lanes for cycling, it is separate from the road itself, because our feedback and experience looking at what some other countries have been doing is that situating or locating the dedicated cycling path next to the road has its pros and cons. And there's always this danger where the fast-moving vehicle on the road may cause danger to the cyclist or the PMD user. What we mentioned in Amokyo is that we will try to reclaim part of this road so that we can make it a pedestrian, a footpath or dedicated cycling path, which is actually separated from the road itself. This is to ensure the safety of the slow-moving PMD users and the cyclists, as well as pedestrians.
Ms. Cheryl Chan.
Thank you, Speaker. I actually concur with Member Mr. Seah Keng Ping's comments earlier on the enforcement. I just have two other SQs for SMS. The first one is, will we consider mandating the licensing registration at the point of sale so that we're actually tackling both the retailers who actually have the onus on their part or responsibility of sending the the different products they're bringing into Enterprise Singapore for that safety mark? That's the first thing. But also to enable the users to know that what they're purchasing is of good quality or has already been certified. And the other one, it's with regards to the use of technology. I think it's always possible with technology that we can also mount gadgets on the PMDs that's for sale, since we're also asking them to pay a licensing fee or registration fee, for all these users. Because the main thing is this technology can actually help to track the speed of the individual PMDs, so that we don't have to triple or quadruple the number of enforcers on the ground. Because I think the issue is very similar to that of high-rise littering or even pigeon feeding. There can never be enough enforcers on the ground to help out with all these enforcements. So with that, it can actually automatically trigger, if there's any violation on the part of the PMD users. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, indeed, some of these suggestions are very valid and very good. Whether we want to mandate licensing registration at the point of sale, it is something that we can look at, but we are also not saying that we will disallow the registration by the retailer on behalf of the buyer. It can be done. But I would also like to remind users to purchase UL 2272 certified or compliant PMDs from reputable retailers, because if you are going to buy it online, then there is a risk that you may be purchasing something that has been falsely declared to be compliant, but actually it may not be. Secondly, on the use of technology, indeed this is exactly what we plan to do. LTA is also embracing technology to see how we can enforce the responsible use of PMD, such as, like I mentioned, the use of mobile CCTV at this point in time. But whenever there are new technologies that are available in the future, we will consider using technology to enhance our enforcement action. But in the interim, I think it is necessary to have sufficient manpower on the ground, which is one of the many feedback that we have received from advisors, that there is very few in the past, physical bodies on the ground to do the enforcement. And therefore, we have increased the number of manpower to tackle the root of the problem. But in the future, if we have technologies can actually facilitate the enforcement action, we'll definitely deploy them.
Mr. Melvin Yong.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to pursue the issue of mandatory third-party insurance. I think although several measures have since been implemented by the ministry, I think we can all understand, due to the sheer number of the PMDs and the lack of sufficient enforcement resources on the ground, it is almost impossible and also impractical to police errant PMD users. When accidents happen, victims suffer, not only suffering the pain and inconvenience of injuries, but having to foot large medical bills, and not to mention the loss of earnings as well. Without insurance, it is difficult for the victims to seek appropriate compensation. I think taking the errant PMD user to court may be fruitless, and not to mention the high cost of litigation which the victim can ill afford. A general search of the insurance market reveals that the premium for a basic third-party insurance policy, if made mandatory, may not be exorbitant. An indicative estimate may cost somewhere between $50 to $80 per annum, depending on the potential volume of PMDs that we have. This would be an affordable price to pay to ensure proper and adequate compensation to victims of accidents involving PMDs, as well as the fire risk from non-compliant devices. So given the large number of non-compliant PMDs still in use out there, and we still have many more months to go, I urge the ministry to seriously reconsider the introduction of mandatory insurance in the light of this real and imminent risk exposure.
I'd like to thank Mr. Melvin Yong for that recommendation. Indeed, we had discussed this issue on several occasions in the previous parliamentary sitting. And having received many of this feedback, we have actually asked SPS Professor Faisal, together with his AMAP, to study this issue of insurance and compensation in the event of any active mobility-related incidents. And they will submit their recommendations later this year after consulting the various relevant stakeholders. So we are not precluding that possibility, but I would also want to say that at this point in time, we will likely start off by requiring PMD sharing operators to have mandatory third-party liability insurance. All right? And at the same time, I've also mentioned just now that the major food delivery companies like Deliveroo, GrabFood, and Foodpanda are and will be providing third-party liability insurance for their riders. So this is one step in the correct direction. In the meantime, we are also working with the insurance companies to see whether we can come up with more affordable insurance plans for the individual users, so that the cost of the insurance will not be a great barrier for them to purchase one if they want to at this point in time. So I hear your appeal, and we'll ask Prof. Faisal to look into it.
Ms. Sylvia Lim.
Thank you, Speaker. I have a clarification for SMS regarding retailers. I think earlier in his speech he mentioned that action had been taken against a number of retailers for selling non-compliant devices. I think the number was around 12, if I heard him correctly. Could he clarify whether any of these retailers were actually online retailers? And related to that, I've come across a few people who have bought e-scooters from Taobao and so on. I wonder how the government is going to work with these online retailers that are headquartered overseas, where they may have an international market where not complying with UL 2272 is legal in those jurisdictions.
I'd like to thank Ms. Sylvia Lim for the clarification. Yeah, indeed, there are 12 retailers that has been taken to task. But at this point in time, I do not have the exact information whether any of these are online retailers. As to your second question, yes, indeed, LT has been working with online shopping platforms to collaborate on educating our consumers and retailers on the regulations pertaining to the sale and use of PMDs in Singapore. And at the same time, also to remove any posts of any false advertisements of compliant devices from their platforms. And like what Ms. Sylvia Lim has rightly pointed out, we are cognizant of the fact that there are thousands of online shopping platforms out there, including Taobao, and many of them are actually based overseas, outside Singapore. And it may not be possible for us to work with every single online retailer. So it is therefore important to have what we have just mentioned, the mandatory inspection regime, to ensure that our PMDs used in our paths meet our technical as well as safety requirements. And we also continue to raise public awareness and educate users, both current as well as future users, that it is illegal to use non-compliant devices on our public paths.
Mr. Alex Yam.
Mr. Speaker, sir, two supplementary questions for the Senior Minister of State. The first on UL 2272. We heard the statistics that the SMS shared earlier. So we assume that there are about 81,000 PMDs out there today which are non-UL 2272 certified. While I don't think 81,000 PMDs will spontaneously catch fire, if it's a safety concern, why would LTA not call for an immediate ban on its usage? We see this in other industries. In the car industry, even though it's just one or two accidents, Toyota has recalled 2.2 million cars before. IKEA, furniture malfunction, has recalled an entire range. For our food industry, even if it's not recalled internationally, Some food additives are found to be problematic. They are recalled in Singapore as well. So why, if there is a safety concern, and we already see a significant number of fires that have resulted from improper usage or battery problems in the last 2 years, why do we not call for that? Second supplementary question has to do with licensing of the rider, or permitting the rider. A couple of honourable members have already mentioned this. Just to name some jurisdictions, Israel requires a special permit for riders who do not already have a driver's license. New Zealand also requires a driver's license, as does certain provinces in Canada. So there are already jurisdictions that require licensing for riders. So while we may not have to go that far, I understand from SMS's response earlier is that not at this point. But at what point do we start considering it? If we keep saying not at this point, and then 2 years down, we'll have to come back in Parliament and have another ministerial statement on the issue. So for the SRP, would it not be permissible to make this compulsory? And for attendance of the course, you are granted say a letter or permit that would allow you to ride or purchase a PMD.
I'd like to thank Mr. Alex Yam. Indeed, non-UL 2272 devices has been identified as one of the possible reasons why we have this increase, this spate of fire incidents recently. But we also understand that there are multiple factors that can lead to a fire incident. As such, while we understand that there is a call to ban the use of non-compliant, non-UL 2272 devices immediately, we also are cognizant of the fact that there are many Singaporeans out there that rely on such devices not only for their daily commuting, but also as a way to sustain their livelihood. So we are quite careful in not doing that. But at the same time, we want to remind PMD users who are currently not using the compliant devices to exercise caution, like what I mentioned about all the safety practices in terms of charging. And if we are able to do that, then we will minimize the risk of fire incidents. As to your second clarification on licensing of riders, at this point in time, we do not have the intention to do so, but let us bring this back to study and see whether this will be necessary in the future.
I'd like to increase the speed of this topic. I'll take the last question. Mr. Ong Teng Koon.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister a supplementary question. I've had a few PMD-related fire incidents in my ward over the past 2 years. Since then, my residents have taken to charging their PMDs outside of their flats while attending to them. But this has also caused alarm and concern with their neighbours of potential fire incidents. I'd like to ask the Minister what is his position regarding the charging of PMDs outside of one's flat. Is this legal or illegal? Thank you.
We would like to clarify that it is at this point in time not illegal to charge your PMD device, whether is it inside your flat or outside the flat. All right, but what's necessary to know is that you're supposed to exercise the necessary precaution when you are charging your PMD devices. Okay, please do not leave it to charge overnight. Do not leave it to charge unattended. Do exercise the precautions that we have mentioned previously. Make sure that you do regular inspection of your battery packs to make sure that they are not damaged. And at the same time, please use compatible chargers and safety mark adapters, right? But if possible, I would encourage the PMD user to actually change out to a UL2272 certified device as soon as possible, not only just for your own safety, but the safety of your neighbors as well.